Good day, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation with Catherine Lacey. And I'd like to know where you are tuning in from or logging in from in the chat. And my name is Ucheoma Onwutuebe, and I'm a third year MFA student here at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I want to begin by thanking BMI's donors, Beverly Rogers, the Rogers Foundation, Miriam Sherin, and the College of Liberal Arts at UNLV. This program is supported in part by grants from Nevada Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. After the conversation, we'll take a few questions from the audience. So if you have one, please drop it in the chat. I also encourage you to keep an eye on Black Mountain Institute's website and all our social media platforms for other events we have lined up for you this spring. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwu Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself and for those who have stewarded it for generations and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous peoples who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Moapu Band of Paiutes. And I'll be introducing our guest for today's event. Catherine Lacey is the author of 5 books: Biography of X, Pew, The Answers, Nobody's Ever Missing, and a short story collection set in American states. Her honors include the Brooklyn Book Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Wheaton Award, and the Young Lions Fiction Award from the New York Public Library. Based in Mexico City and sometimes in New York, she's a fellow at the Cullman Center at the New York Public Library for 2023 to 2024. Her debut work of nonfiction, the Möbius Book, is forthcoming from FSG, as well as a second short story collection, My Stalkers. I met Catherine Lacey in the spring of 2022 at the At Omi Writers Residency, and I was immediately struck by this very serious writer who only resurfaced at dinner time after spending the entire day plowing through yet another manuscript. I was even more impressed when I learned of her oeuvres, her novels, her short story collection, the multiple criticisms, and the awards that she's received. And not only have I known her kindness to offer direction when needed in this dreadly literary journey, Catherine's prolificness and craft is worth studying. Her novel, Biography of X, which we'll be discussing today, is to date the most innovative work of fiction I have ever read. And as a writer myself who enjoys playing with form, it's a privilege to be exposed to Catherine Lacey's work and also to be in conversation with her this afternoon. Hello, Catherine. Thank you
Hi.
so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's really a delight to see you again. It's been a couple years now. And
Yeah.
I just have to say first though that I was struck both by you're hardworking. You were working so hard.
You
You
work
were.
harder.
And then also with the outfits, very important. And I feel like I was learning from your style that spring and
Oh,
like trying to like get dressed for work. Like look cute, put it together, be creative. I was very inspired by it.
thank you
And
so
also
much.
by your work that I got to know as well. Yeah, so it's a delight to see you again, and thanks for inviting me here, and thank you the Black Mountain Institute for having us.
Thank you so much. Before we dive into the questions about Biography of X, which is, I've been thinking about it. X has been with me all this time that I've read the work. I just wanted to remind you that it's been almost 6 years you were here at Black Mountain Institute at the Breakout Writers series. And I think probably at the time you were promoting the debut, Nobody's Ever Missing. And I want to ask, what has changed since then?
So much has changed. I mean, it's weird. I feel like it's really weird when you're like, there's this extra energy around a debut book
Mhm.
because it's something people haven't seen before. People don't know your voice, and also you don't know your voice, and you don't really understand the difference between the work that you do and your writer voice and sort of yourself. And it's this kind of, I feel like this kind of strange sort of it's a strange sort of tender, weird, wonderful, awful moment. And then you kind of get used, or at least for me, I feel like I've kind of gotten used to it. And I think I mean, with that first book, you kind of also think, or at least I thought, and I've known a lot of other people think this, it's a fluke or something. You're like, I know I worked hard to do this, but I don't know if I could do it again. It kind of like some people only write a book and you know, that's fine also. But I think I was sort of like, well, like TBD, let's see if I like have any more in me. And I do, and I do, I did, and I do, and I like it. And I like, now I'm like, it's so great, because really the thing that makes me the happiest is spending large chunks of my day and my life alone, and then having brief concentrated periods of getting to talk to people about other things they've been doing while they're alone, things I've been reading or whatever. And so now I've had almost, it's been 8 years, I guess, since I was there, and about 10 years since my first book came out. And so I've gotten a full decade of like the right amount of solitude. And so I'm in a good mood.
Well, so it's
Yeah.
safe to say that it's safe to say that all your wishes have come true, like from the debut writer to who you are now.
But I think also, like, you think you know what you're like. I mean, I'm sure lots of things didn't happen that I thought that I was going to be working on, but you kind of forget them. I definitely trashed a couple books, and you know, have taken some like left and right turns that I didn't think I would take. But then I think the things that didn't happen end up leading something that is also good, or is like better for you, or you just don't know. So yeah.
Okay. While reading Biography of X, I was just thinking what level of research went into this, because there's a lot of reinvention and recasting of reality, and historical figures make appearances, that events are kind of altered. And I'm thinking, before you have the liberty as a writer to recast this event, you must like have had like a firm grasp of things as they are, like done a ton of research. So I just want to know what kind of research went into writing this book.
I think a lot of the research happened like long before I knew that I was writing a book of this kind, because I think once I kind of hit on the idea, um, once I kind of started hit on like the form or the structure of the book, really weirdly for me, like sort of before I even started writing it, I kind of had a sense of the voice and like a sense of the shape of the book, in terms of it like being, you know, a novel that's disguised as a biography. Like I knew that from the very beginning. It's not like I was working in the story and I came upon the form. So I knew the form. And then once I was thinking about the form, and I was thinking about how do you make a biography seem like a biography, or when I'm reading a real biography, it feels like a real biography because there's works cited and there's a kind of a variety of voices talking about this character. And I think right before I started Biography of X, an essay that I had written about the artist Cy Twombly was quoted in a biography of Cy Twombly. And I was like really moved to have a sentence that I had written about Cy Twombly, and because his work means so much to me. And I've been so moved and continue to be very moved by his paintings. And I felt really like both like really honored to have a little sentence pop up in somebody else's book, and also like I didn't feel betrayed. The name of the writer is Joshua Rivkin, and I'm grateful that he put that quote in there. But there's a little weird part of me that felt kind of like betrayed, that like this sentence had been taken and put in a book, and I had no warning about it. And then I learned that's just kind of like what biographers have to do. And I kind of wanted to like replicate that feeling. So I was thinking about, well, if I'm making this book that's supposed to be like a biography, what am I going to put in? What are the other voices? How am I going to like kind of fill in some of the gaps, or just create more of a kind of chorus around this fake character? And I started thinking about the books and the characters and the biographies and the essays that I've loved so much, or the writers, or even that I've maybe been confused by, or that have just lingered with me. And I went sort of retroactively through, I think I was at Ole Miss at the time. I was teaching at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. And so I pulled a bunch of books from that library that were in my kind of mental library, and then I really started kind of going through them and finding the lines or scenes or set pieces that meant something to me. And then also online, like, I don't know, there's this Lou Reed interview where he's kind of losing his mind a little bit, and I was very struck by it as like a piece of almost theater. And so I wanted to pull some things from that. So it was kind of like all that stuff I had seen before I started to, write this book. But then, once you're in it, then there's some other kind of more people start popping up. And it was just kind of, it was very collage. It's not like I didn't try and make myself an expert in, Fluxus or like any particular like movement or time period or like, East and West Berlin, like that history. I didn't try and make myself an expert in anything. I don't think I'm very good at expertise. Like I get bored. I'm kind of like ADHD. I'm a little bit like, I'm now like this one thing leads to another, and I'm on this like long rabbit hole that kind of takes me on a bunch of things. And I think, maybe I could become a writer that like really tries to rein it in and become an expert in something, but that's not natural to me. And so my research was really just like blah, 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 just kind of all
Yeah.
over the place. Yeah.
Um, but when I read it, I was thinking that you had like this very firm grasp of the art world, and it leads to my next question about sometimes as writers we kind of bury our heads in our literary cocoons, like we don't know anything beyond other people's work. But with the way you cover the art world in Biography of X, I was just thinking, oh, she knows a lot about the art world. So can you talk about that, about how writers we can, spread our tentacles of knowledge or our how do I put this? Like, how can we invite other words into our literary circles so that it kind of enriches our own writing rather than just being stuck with, sentence structure and plot and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a couple ways to do it. One is just like get out there and be an idiot in like somebody else's world, like I kind of like being a fool in the music world, and like I'm an active listener. I don't know how to play a single instrument or sing or anything, but I like really love getting deep into like the work of different musicians. And then the art world is a little bit more natural to me just because I think when I was in my early 20s and I was writing a lot, and I was also making paintings and bad sculptures and bad drawings and trying just like, I had always been doing it. And so I think I was at this moment where I was like, I really want to get serious about one or the other. And I ended up, it wasn't really a decision. It just like happened this way that I was like, well, I'm gonna get serious about writing by writing about the art world. And so when I moved to New York for grad school, the original idea was that I was going to go to galleries. I was going to try and understand that world from the inside out, and I wanted to write profiles of like young artists, because that's who interested me. And I sort of wanted to I kind of imagined myself finding a kind of group of artists that I had kind of self-selected, not like this group that was working together that all were referencing each other, but I wanted to kind of create my own little city of artists that I admired and sort of watch them get older. And then I started going to art galleries and stuff when I was here, and I was really like, I had just moved here from New Orleans. I was very like, I'm, like very green in New York, and was just very like, hi, I'm Catherine, like, what's your name? Which is not the mood. Like the art world is very like, you have to be cool, you have to be reserved. There's like a lot of money in it. I just didn't understand. I didn't understand what I was walking into, and I feel like I got a lot of coldness and a lot of disinterest, and kind of like just like I was basically invisible because I didn't speak or seem like any of the people that belong there. And so I quickly kind of got disinterested in that, but I always kind of kept up with certain artists that I really like, that, to me, they're kind of my like, if I was having a Whitney biennial, if I was having the Lacey biennial, I know like the 20 artists that would be there. They're like, maybe there's like 2 of them that are actually in the Whitney biennial, but like I have my own world of my own art world that in my head is much nicer than the actual art world. So that was something I did know a little bit about, but I don't know about it because I belong there or really I'm an expert, but more just like kind of futzing around. The other way I think you can kind of get to know, like I'm struck by, like, in Mexico City, all the writers know all the artists know all the filmmakers, know all the musicians. There's a lot more like overlap in between disciplines. And I feel like, at least in New York, and I think maybe in America in general, we're a little bit more regimented. And I don't really understand why that is. It's cultural, or it's just like by force of habit. But yeah, I just try and like stay close to people that aren't necessarily writing, but also just like literally going out to galleries, go out to music shows, go out to theater, even if you don't know what you're going to see. I think just like exposing yourself. It's like I've often had moments in theater, in music especially, where like I see somebody doing something, and it helps me understand what I'm writing a little bit better. It helps me understand a kind of interesting solution to like a narrative problem that I'm having. And I, yeah, do that.
Thank you. Um, I think the next question I want to ask is a craft question, because I'm still like in my beginning writer bag. So I need all the craft lessons that I can get. But I noticed that Biography of X is like very replete with characters, and even X herself just takes on personal, different personas. So, and there's also like real people who appear: David Bowie, Susan Sontag, and even Dennis Johnson. And I want to ask the question of how does a writer go about creating multiple characters in a work, and how can you make them very distinct as you have in Biography of X? Because I could tell even the times X takes on different personas, you could tell this just very distinct, and it shows to your craftsmanship of like creating very distinct characters. So how can a writer just do that, like, especially when you're working with multiple characters in a book?
I think, well, there's a couple. Some of it is logistical, right? So if you have a bunch of different characters intersecting and recurring, and you need to understand timelines and everything. It was a lot of like sticky notes, and like I had an office at the time that was just like, just a lot of writing on the wall and timelines, and this person's here then, and this person's here there, and like kind of sketching them out. But I think also another thing that I do is I need to know, like, not I don't need to have in the book a physical description of a character. It's not really important to me whether she has red hair or pink hair or black hair or whatever. It's not, to me, it's not, that's not what I look for it when I'm reading. I don't really look for physical descriptions of people from the outside, but I do want to know what it feels like for a character from the inside. I want to know how do they occupy a room? What does it feel like to be them? How do they breathe? How do they, what is it like when they're in a room by themselves? I need to know like those things, which are not necessarily visible, but are very important, especially when it comes to establishing voice. I think you need to know all of that about a character to understand the way they speak, more than you need to know that like they wear, what kind of clothes they wear, and like how cute they are, or not cute they are, or whatever. So I don't think about the characters visually so much as I think about them internally. And sometimes for me, when I'm thinking when it's first person characters, so for X and all
Yeah.
the characters that she inhabits, I really needed to know kind of physically, how does this character carry herself? How does, how does this one breathe that's different than that one? Those sorts of things. But then especially for the characters that were maybe more brief, like there's some that only are there for a chapter or something.
Yeah.
I often like will pin those characters to like a person that I know, but not very well. So like there's this character that there's this character, Bertha, I can't remember her name, but she's like the only employee when this small press is started, this small
Yeah.
book publisher is started, and X, as one of her personas, hires only two people, but really just this main one, and then she
Yeah.
hires this man to be her assistant.
Yeah.
But anyway, that character is completely based on my writer friend Molly McGee. And it's not like she's never physically described, and it's not even like I think Molly would behave this way or talk this way, but it's like Molly, I've known Molly for a number of years. We're not super close. It's not like I'm not gonna use my sister or like my mom or something in this way, because it's, too much, right? But it's somebody that I know like a little bit, and I think is generally somebody that I think is like charming, or like they have their own little way of moving. I'll like kind of attach a character to them just so that I have something to go from, you know? And it doesn't feel as arbitrary as it sounds. Like it almost like is almost like when I was writing that character, Molly came out and was like, oh, I belong with this one. I've got it. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Molly. So now I can always just like picture Molly when I'm thinking of this character, and I don't have to do the labor of like trying to imagine or describe them physically, you know?
Mm. Wow, thank you. I think I have to keep that in mind when creating my own characters, because sometimes as writers we're fixated on the external of the character and forget their kind of internal geographies and what they are made of what they are made up of on the inside. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And one thing I want to find out is about the Southern Territory. I'm thinking, why did you decide to cast it in that way? Because I think when I was reading it, I was thinking the Southern Territory is almost like reminiscent of the world and what we are afraid of it turning into. Women's rights are stifled, there's heightened fascism. And I wanted to find out from you, like, why did you decide to cast that side of America in such gloomy state?
Yeah, some of the Southern Territory stuff was just reverse engineering because I knew from the beginning that I wanted this book to be a biography, you know, a novel that's turning to be a biography, and that I wanted it to be by a woman writing about her late wife. But then, and I wanted it to happen in the 20th century. I have no idea why all those things were very important to me from the beginning, but they were kind of like they were the walls, like they were not negotiable to me. Um, and but then I didn't want to have to actually write about what it would feel like to be a lesbian couple in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and just the kind of, you know, casual sexism, casual homophobia that they would have to be up against. I thought, like, I'm not trying to write reality. Like, I'm trying to write about this relationship, which would exist outside of time anyway, because all of our relationships with each other, to some degree, our most important relationships in our life do exist outside of time. It doesn't matter that you fell in love during the Trump era or that you got divorced when like the Berlin Wall fell. It's kind of, I mean, maybe those are bigger things, but like to some degree, our relationships exist outside of time, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that these two women, the intensity and strangeness of their relationship, I thought was more interesting than anything that the external world would be telling them or trying to control them or trying to get out of them or trying to get them to not do. And so I just wanted to remove that apparatus. And it was like a huge thing. So you can't, so how do I get in America where two women could be in a relationship and one of them could be this kind of powerful Lydia Tarr character, although Tarr had not come out until I think Tarr came out
Yeah.
at the same time as the book did, but it's
Yeah.
kind of a weird, like that character is very similar. So how could, like, what would it be like if Lydia Tarr had grown up in a world where, or X had grown up in a world rather, where, well, if she was operating, her career was operating in a world that wasn't trying, that didn't care that she was a woman, that was just like, whatever, that's not important, you know? And also, I think for myself, I was kind of interested in like, what would it have been like to start publishing books if nobody had made a thing out of me being a woman, which has been happening less and less as we've gone along. But 2014 was when I first published, and there's some crazy stories. I won't take up the rest of this hour telling the crazy stories of like what it's like, what it was like to be a young woman in 2014 putting out a book that was, you know, that I did events for and met random people, and just some crazy things happened to me that I was like, what year is it? Is it like 1950? What is this? And anyway, so I I wanted these women to be able to just be, right? And so I had to reverse engineer all of American history in order to make that happen, right? And for that to be the background. And when I started thinking through, like I went back to sort of, I was reading some like late 19th century political thought in America, sort of trying to understand like where, because this was a time period where we were a much smaller country, a much newer country. We really could have gone in a bunch of different ways politically. And I was reading about some things around that time, and I kind of decided that that would have been a moment where this thing would have happened instead of that thing, and that thing instead of this thing. And then Emma Goldman could have been Emma Goldman, the like anarchist from Russian-born anarchist who was very politically active in the United States in the late 19th century and early 20th century. What if she had had much more of an impact, much more of a voice? And then I kind of So anyway, so I started doing all this, but then once you do that, like, it's just, you know, there's a phrase that's like, you can do anything in a novel as long as the buses run on time. You know, you can do anything with rewriting plot, create a different world, whatever, but there has to be some kind of, there still has to be some order, you know, and you have to be answering to something. And so I just, in my imagining, I just kind of got to the point where it just seemed natural that, well, at this point, I don't think that the South could have tolerated the kind of changes that would have been going on, you know, in a more mainstream America. They would have had to kind of segregate themselves further from the rest of the country. And when I look at like what happened in, you know, the history of North and South Korea, or the history in, you know, in Berlin and Germany, in the Eastern Bloc, it's like I was basically just reading those histories and being like, I'm imagining us getting America having gotten to that point much earlier, you know, and maybe we're going there again. I don't know. This is not like a predictive book, but I was thinking, you know, in my imaginary world, this happened in the 30s, that we really reached a breaking point. And what could that have looked like? And this is just what I came up with, not out of any kind of real expertise, but more out of what felt sort of emotionally true. I am from Mississippi also, and so it's not hard for me to imagine like that part of the country just sort of being like peace, you know, like because it feels like that. I sometimes feel like I'm traveling to a different country when I go home, you know, when I go back to where I grew up. So it's just not hard to see. It's not hard to see it as um yeah, it's written that way just because it's written that way. I don't I guess if that answers your question. But
Yeah.
mainly I just wanted these two women to be left alone. And I was willing to move any kind of historical mountain in order to just let this woman make her art. And she could be an asshole and a terrible person and a bunch of other things, but nobody would be like, but she's a woman, you know?
Hmm.
So
Wow. And I think at least naturally to the next question about the limits of fiction, because you blur the lines of nonfiction and fiction in this work. And sometimes as fiction writers, we are often afraid to, you know, blur that line, to paint outside that line, because we don't want to be, I don't know, maybe a certain kind of fear to just remain in our fictional world. But this novel even invites like real life people. There's David Bowie in this book interacting with X, right? X is writing music for David Bowie and whatnot. So can you speak a little bit about how writers can, you know, just overcome that fear of invention, overcome that fear of blurring the lines of fiction and just doing inventive things with their work?
yeah, you know, it's funny, like I feel like there's a lot of well, there have been a number of books recently, and I mean recently being like the last 20 years, let's say, like in the States, that where the main character and the author share the same name and the same
Mm.
maybe everything, right? Like, and those books are really interesting to me. And I think I can't imagine myself writing one personally, and I don't read all of them. Like, it's not my favorite genre or something. But what I do think is really nice about it is how vulnerable it makes you, you know. And I think the times when those books fail is when the writer is resisting the vulnerability that action necessarily brings into the space. And I like the vulnerability. I want anything where the author and the reader are having to meet each other on even plane in some way, in so much as you possibly can. And I think the only way you can do that is by being really honest in one capacity or another. And I mean, you could be really honest in a book about dragons. Like, you could be really honest and like very personal in a book that's taking place in outer space 400 years from now. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have, you know, real people in your books, or you know, real people or whatever. But um yeah, I think I don't know. I guess I'm always trying to find a way in, find a way for me to feel like implicated by the fiction that I'm writing, even if it is, even because it is, you know, invented. Like, there's so many things in here that you know, there's so many scenes that I've never seen anything like this, or people that I've never known any person like this. And then of course there's lots of characters in there that are, you know, are kind of smuggling in characteristics from people that I know, or there's little parts of my life that are smuggled in there but distorted along the way. And I do a lot of that I do that in I've done that in everything. I've done that in every book that I've
I
ever written
noticed
is.
that in some of your short stories also. I think I was over the weekend, I was just in this rabbit hole of reading your short stories, and the things you do with form is just unimaginable. Yeah. And it's something to learn from. That's just taking the limits of fiction and just doing something very inventive with it. It's just something to learn from.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. For the audience, if you have questions for Catherine, please drop them in the chat, and would ask her those questions. One last thing I noticed is when I was reading Biography of X, I felt like it just began with CM diving into this rabbit hole of research, and it was only after you could feel the literariness of the work when she starts to come face to face with the grief. And was that like very intentional? Like, was that a way of you making the book feel more like a real biography rather than like a literary work? I don't know if you understand my question, but
I think I do. I mean, I'm trying to go back and forth across that line in a couple ways, but you know, like, well, I will say there was originally okay, when you're reading a real biography, it's
yeah.
because you know Oscar Wilde and you're curious about what his life was like, or you know uh, David Bowie or whomever,
Yeah.
and you have some kind of relationship with a relationship with the subject in your mind already. You have an image of them. You already know the place they occupy in history and in the world. When you're writing a fictional biography, of course that's not there. So that was, but I for some reason I think I had built up this character in my head so much that by the time I sat down to write it, it was as if she already existed. But then I forgot that that's not true for the reader. And I think like I try and create this kind of protected bubble for myself when I'm like in the early phases of drafting something. But I went like really I spent a long time writing that draft. And then I gave it to my agent, and I was so confident in it. I felt so good about it because in my head the narrative was, I could see all of it, and I had done all this research and whatever. And I was very excited. I gave it to my agent, and she was like, "Catherine, this is so boring. This book is so boring
Wow.
because you you wrote a book about a fake person, but there's a presumption in the form that we know who you're talking about. We don't know who you're talking about." I hadn't really, and so I was like, "Oh, okay. I have to like, there has to be a different. I had to have a different way in. And I really had to like. It was definitely the most extensive, like, I mean, I revise a lot as I go, and I throw out a lot as I go. But it was the first time I had ever fully been like, this is a start to finish book that I feel good being done with. And I gave it to my agent. And when I went back to it, I think at first I was like, oh, she's wrong. I just had to look at it again and find a way to explain it to
You're
her or
always
something. But
wrong
she's
about
always right.
her.
She's always right. And so I went back through and she was unfortunately very right. And I really had to throw out everything and find a different way into so that's when CM became more of a character. She was much more buried in it. And I think I wanted that quality to be there, but I want you to kind of forget that you're not reading a biography sometimes.
Mhm.
And for there to be a kind of confusion or a kind of like kind of quivering of the line between your life and the book and reality and unreality and fiction and nonfiction. I want that to kind of be like a little fuzzy at times. Um, but I went too far. I went too far originally. And so I think some of and then even when I was done with the book completely and gave it to my editors, of course, then you're not done because then they have notes and they have good points and they have good questions. And there was more of it. I remember I did have to build up more the sense of where she's writing from,
Mm.
because it was easy for me to forget getting really deep into the research and kind of establishing the contours of this fake world. It's easy for me to forget that this woman, as she's writing it, is completely heartbroken and full of grief. And she's writing it as a way to deal with that and as a way to mask grief that she's going through. And that's a familiar process to me. But even when you think, oh, I'm not going to feel this grief. I'm going to write. I'm going to work on something instead of feeling this grief. Even when you do that, the things that you write, they have that grief in them, you know, and you can see it. Sometimes you can't see it right when you're working on it. You think, oh, I'm totally passing as like just grown up lady, no problems at all. Boop, 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 you know. But then when you go back a couple years later and you read this story that you wrote, or you read an email that you wrote when you were in the beginning of some horrible grief, you can see it. You can see it. It's in your syntax. It's all over the place. So I think that was one thing I had to go back and kind of build up, because as I got distracted by some of the putting the puzzle pieces together and getting the trains to run on time and everything, I sort of forgot the human that's telling the story. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have questions from the audience. Krista says, I love the way Biography of X plays with genre of biography. Are there other genres you're interested in experimenting with in the future?
Can you say that last part of it again?
Are there other genres you're interested in experimenting with in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I like actual biographies that are kind of like a little bit slanted. And so I do sometimes think of actually writing a real, trying to write a story of someone's life. But you know, I don't, not so fictional. I don't know. Well, I haven't started or even tried or even found the person that I would write about. So I don't even know why I'm saying, oh, but I wouldn't do it this way, I wouldn't do it that way, because what do I know? But yeah, that's a form that's interesting to me. I mean, nonfiction in general, I am like in the beginning, in the research phases of writing like a long piece about, well, I can't say what, but it's like it involves a lot of scientific research and interviews and like really proper journalism stuff that kind of makes me a little afraid. And because it makes me afraid, I want to do it because I don't know how to do it. And so I'm sort of interested in putting myself in that environment. And then, I mean, I'm in the beginning stages of some screenplay collaborations with a few people. And that's a fun space also because I totally don't understand that writing. I mean, like I've spent a few years trying to understand it and I don't understand it. But that's good. I also don't feel like I understand the novel, you know, but I want to, you know, yeah, I don't know how to not experiment. I don't know how to not like ask too many questions, you know. And be like, does it have to be this way? Does it have to be that way? Like, yeah. So
I have this question from Jessica, and she said, are there any other books or writers you enjoy that blur the boundaries between fiction and nonfiction in a similar or different ways?
Oh, so many. I there's like is there a bibliography in the back? I'm pretty sure there is, but there actually might not be. Oh yeah, I don't think I actually even ended up printing it in there. But there's a link on my website, or there used to be. I will put it back up there somehow. I will put it somewhere, or you can probably find it if you search like bookshop.org bibliography of X. I made a list. I made like a list on bookshop.org of books that kind of went into the research of this, and a lot of them are also sort of blurring boundaries. One that comes to mind that I used a lot that was really, I think, very much a catalyst text for me, because I read it all right before I started writing, was After Kathy Acker by Chris Kraus. And it's a proper biography, and it really does tell her life story, but because Kraus had the kind of particular and strange angle that she had on Kathy Acker's life, like they were friends, they kind of weren't, they kind of were. She was there for some of the scenes that are in the book, which is very unusual for a biographer. It has this very interesting edge to it that I was very I don't know how to describe exactly, because in a lot of ways it's a proper biography, and in other ways there's something about it that's like just off enough that it's like very delicious, you know. But I don't know, there's like a million more, but I can't think of them off the top of my head because I never can, which is why I made that list.
Your first,
which is also somewhat incomplete. I'm thinking now because I remember making it and being like, I still have like 50 to add, and I didn't add. But there's like 150 there, so that should get you started.
Yeah, I think we need that link. Your first nonfiction work is coming out this year, right?
Yeah, in 2025.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. That's not the
The
Möbius
Möbius book
book.
is,
Yeah.
well, it's like I started writing it. Well, okay. I write a lot of diaries, right? I keep my diaries. I really, spend more time writing diary than I do anything else. And then I have like other like I have kind of a book on my laptop that I've been writing for like 12 years that I never intend to publish. But I will work on it as if it's like I need to finish it, It's never going to be finished, and it's like I don't know how to describe it. It's not exactly it's not a diary, but it's something. And so I have all these, like, I'm constantly like writing things I have no intention of publishing whatsoever. This is all to say that. Um but there was one I was kind of in a place in my life a couple years ago where I was thinking about the way that faith is this kind of recurrent fixture in my life. And then, I mean, I think in life in general, but I guess I can really only speak about my own. And not just religious faith, but all kinds of faith we have in other people, faith we have in the future, faith we have in the environment, faith we have in society and our friends and, relationship and God. Like, there's so many different types of faith. And I think that it's natural for them to be kind of built up and then fall apart, and built up and fall apart on their own different spiraling timelines. And sometimes all of your faiths are on the decline at the same time. And it felt like a lot of people were going through a thing like that at that point, like 2021. We were kind of like, how long is this global pandemic going on? Like, what is happening? Like, like when you're alone, or somewhat alone for that long, I think everybody gets into a state of something has to fall apart, right? Like, quickly. So I was writing about these things, and then about several months after I was, I felt like I had been spiraling the same idea in notebooks and diaries and random documents on my computer and whatever. I realized they were all kind of talking to each other, and they all kind of had this, even though they were about different things and they were conversations with friends and they were me just trying to make sense of things, they had this kind of cohesion. And so I was like, let me gather these things together and like complete them. And that's what I was working on when I met you. But I thought that it was going to be just this nonfiction book that dealt with this, and just regular nonfiction, kind of somewhere in between personal essay and memoir and, I don't know, 10 other things, right? But as I was working on it, I decided that what it was lacking was fiction, and not like fictionalizing what happened or fictionalizing anything from my life, but really true fiction. And so the book is going to be printed where you hold it hold it this way, I guess, and it would say Möbius Book, and you start it and it's a book, right? But
Yeah.
then if you turn it over like that, it also
Yeah.
says Möbius Book exactly the same, and you read on
Okay.
this side and it's fiction. And so
Wow.
there's a kind of a short novel and a long essay, and they're printed back to back in the same way that like a Möbius strip is this kind of like, and both of them, they end in a way that leads you into the beginning of the next one. And so you can start on, I wanted it to be this way because I wanted you to start with either side. I didn't want it to be, oh, I'm reading this essay and then she suddenly is telling me this fiction, then she goes back to the essay or something, or the other way around, right? I wanted it to be, well, both of these stories are equal, and neither one comes before the other, and they're in the same book because they are the same book, but they're kind of Siamese twins. They're back to back.
Okay.
So
Wow, I'm
yeah,
eager
so
to
that's
read it.
but it was like, it's not like I started that book being like, oh, I know the form and now I'm going to write into this form. It was very different than Biography of X, where Biography of X, I knew the shape I wanted the book to be in, and I kind of filled it in. And this one was just groping in the dark for a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm excited to read it. I have more questions from the audience.
Okay.
Sakina says, what was your biggest challenge with writing the biography of X?
Oh, just like not like, I mean, I know this happens every time. This is like what the question you asked at the beginning of like what's changed in between, 8 years ago and now. Like, more books have happened. And I think, as I knew theoretically that like you get you reach a point in every book where you're like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't think I'm going to pull it off. I don't want to do this today. I am tired of this. I have no ideas. I want to go to sleep. You know, like you can have weeks of days like that. You can have
Yeah.
many days back to back. You can have a few months of that kind of mood. And I definitely felt a lot of that while I was doing this. I also like right as I was ending it, but I was still kind of, and I was still making some of the things that, because there's objects and things that are photographed that are in the book, and some of them I made, some of them other people made, some of them are found. I couldn't live in the house I had been living in, and I had to move very suddenly, and I wasn't done writing, and I was kind of like, how do I like hold on to the mood of the office that I wrote this in order to complete the editing and the objects? But that was challenging. So, but that was unique to this book. So, but
Okay.
I think the dread was kind of, you know, it's a big book for me. I don't think of myself as the kind of writer. I don't want to write a bunch of 500-page books. It's not really, I really loved a shorter book, and this one it just had to be this way. And so I kind of had to be like, put on your big girl pants and finish the big book, you know, because I'm like, and just telling myself like, you don't have to do this again. You just have to do it this time, you
Yeah.
know. But there was some of that dread.
Yeah. Okay. Two more questions. And
Mhm.
Delight is asking, did you get emails or reactions from the real people you mentioned in the book? And were they similar or different from your reaction when your essay was quoted in a biography?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, some of the people that I quoted, I know, and I let them know ahead of time. But most of the people are not people I know. They were
Hmm.
just people who I was like, who, I mean, most of them were just like, oh, I had just read this essay by Naomi Fry, so I'm going to use her name in here. But I also kind of felt like the Naomi Fry that I know through her work in the New Yorker, like I don't know her personally, I've never met her, but I feel like I know her personality a little bit from her work, and I'm kind of like, yeah, she would write about X. So she would like, I could imagine there being a Naomi Fry like person who's being a journalist, who, let me give her this fun line or
Yeah.
this like fun assignment or something in this alternate world, and why not just call her Naomi Fry? Like I was just kind of like, why not? I have all these footnotes I have to fill up with names. Why not? I mean, some of it was just me having fun too. Also, like all the footnote stuff really happened in that kind of like crazy, you know, like summer of 2020, where we were all just like, we had been at home for a long time at that point for
Mm.
human beings to be at home, and we were getting our kicks where we could get our kicks, you know. And for
Yeah.
me, it was like just putting random people's names into my footnotes, so I felt like I had company. You know, it's almost like the feeling of like I really wanted an acquaintance again. You know, I just wanted somebody I didn't know that well, kind of, that I bump into, you know. And so that was my way of like creating that acquaintance feeling.
Mm. Because
And
when
I
I was,
did, yeah, I have heard from some of them. I think some people were more pleased or less pleased. And I, you know, I mean, there's no real complaint. There's no real trespass, you know. It's just your name, you know. But some people felt like that was a trespass, I think.
mm.
But I don't know.
Because
I don't
when
know.
I was reading, I was a little bit worried for you. Like, I hope she doesn't run into trouble mentioning these people. But it was just, I think what it did for me as a writer was just the limitlessness of our craft as writers. We could do anything we want, even though just not anything particularly, but you could just, move the needle a little bit as a writer. And I'm glad you did that. And I think I have one last question, from Dara. Could you share any of the names from your list of favorite artists and or speak more about how visual art has helped you solve narrative problems?
Is the beginning of that question asking me to share names of people, of artists I don't like?
No, no, you
Oh,
like.
oh, that I do like. Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know if, like, I feel like I like the fact, you know, when I don't like something, I totally forget it. You know, it
Mm,
ceases. I
yeah.
don't really give a lot of energy to the artists that don't do it for me. But really, this is like off the top of my head because, well, like I do think of like Cy Twombly as like this kind of weird spiritual grandpa in my head. You know, I think he died in like maybe 2006 or 7 or something, and I was really bummed. I really felt like, why didn't he call me? Or like, why didn't I get to meet him or something? But to me, I don't know why, he's this abstract painter, but to me,
Yeah.
he's really important. And oh gosh, I'm just gonna blank on everyone's name because that's my, like, I'm looking at 40, my brain has started doing this a lot. Um, I know 40 is not that old, but there's like early Alzheimer's in my family, so I don't know if my brain's gonna be around for much longer. But I can't think of anyone's name, to be honest, except for Cy Twombly. But it's like all right there, you know.
Mhm.
If I had known this question before, I would have made a
Yeah.
list. But Julian Waring, fantastic artist that inspired me a lot in college and continues to. I just saw a retrospective of hers that was at the Guggenheim in 2021. That was amazing, completely amazing. I love her work because of the way that she has to interact with people. She just kind of conceptual work that's um, it requires her to be in relationship with subjects that she's taking portraits and video of. So I would say look her up. Adrian Piper is somebody that I use a lot in the novel, and her work is completely amazing. I'm not going to defile it with summary. Um, and like, I don't know, younger Alex Prager. I think I'm getting the name right. I'm pretty sure I'm getting the name right. But the person I'm talking about is contemporary. She's probably in her 40s or something. That she does video and photo and I guess some sculpture. And you could argue she does a bunch of different forms, I guess.
Mhm.
But very striking, strange, kind of arranged photographs. Um, and I'm somebody should Google Alex Prager and tell me if that's what I'm thinking of. How would you know? I'm 94% sure that that is the right name. Um, but yeah, now I actually want to create my like fake Whitney biennial.
Yes, do.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think we have time for just one more question before we wrap it up. And I saw a question here. Tom, I feel like I'm hearing more and more about Mexico City as a destination for expert creative. What drew you there?
I went there because I have a very good friend, actually a writer I met at OMI the first time I went,
Mhm.
or one of the first times I went, named Brenda Lozano, incredible writer, and an incredible friend. And I had visited her a couple times, and then I just was like, I went to visit. I went for a long visit, and I kept staying, and then I decided I was like, well, I didn't speak Spanish at the time. I still arguably don't speak Spanish, even though I'm trying. Um, and so I started learning Spanish, and that really changed the city for me a lot. Um, and also just like having, I know there's a lot of expats there. It's kind of a problem. There's actually this amazing essay. If you Google Zoe Mendelson Substack, she wrote an incredible essay just a few weeks ago about the problem of expats, American expats, specifically in Mexico City. She is an American expat that's been there for, I don't know, 10 years or close to it. And her picture of it does a better job of anything I could really summarize. It's not great. It's not great news in terms of the like, be an American expat in Mexico City, no problem whatsoever. Border wall, what? Like it's complicated. But I met my partner, and he's from Mexico, and we're moving back to Mexico. So it's a bit different having a partner that's from there. But even before I met him, I was like, this is where I want to live. Partially because I was really enjoying the defamiliarization of myself into Spanish,
Mm.
and partially because I have a couple of really close friends that are there that are from there, and so it's a beautiful place. And like I said, like I do think that there's this amazing overlap in between different types of artists. Like a very good friend that's a translator and writer there, one of his best friends, this incredible painter, and they're very close, and like so those worlds are kind of butting up against each other, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy it for that and many other reasons, and at the same time it is um I'm still kind of working out the complicated. It wasn't like my intention to become an expat. Like it was very accidental sort of. I kind of backed into it and then I fell in love. So I made it more complicated for myself. But I do recommend going there at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I think we can call it a day. Thank you everyone for joining us. And I think there's a link to purchase Catherine's book in the chat. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. And please keep an eye on Black Mountain Institute's website and for other events that we have lined up for you this spring. Until we meet again, goodbye.
Okay. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.